I'm Chip Freud, and this is the Artist Spotlight, conversations with contemporary artists based on 5 simple questions that explore the artist's journey, creativity, and sources of inspiration. Welcome to another episode of the Artist Spotlight podcast. Today, I'm joined by Pittsboro, North Carolina-based artist Boots Quimby. Boots looks at all that she's done in her life as a creative expression. Like me, she is an encore career artist, having not picked up a paintbrush until 2016. Prior to her painting career, she had earned a PhD in cell biology, taught high school and college level classes, and raised 3 kids. Not surprisingly, given her science background, Boots sees every painting as an experiment. I'm really excited about this conversation. Boots, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored.
Well, it's a fun thing for me to get to know a number of the artists that I've met in my travels a little bit better, and this is a wonderful opportunity to do just that. So, can you ground the audience a little bit in what you're about these days? Can you share a little project maybe that you're just starting, something maybe you just finished?
So I am almost always working on a canvas and also a small wood block. So I paint on canvas. I use acrylic painting on canvas and painting on old barnwood. And I actually started painting on old barnwood because my husband got some old barnwood to make me a bookshelf, and there were some pieces left, and I thought, oh, these would be kind of fun things to do. And they are. They're a fun little thing. They're usually fairly quick. I can do them in a day or two, and they're good for when I get a little stuck on my canvases or not sure what I want to do. I can kind of shift gears and work on one of these small little blocks. And they seem to be very popular when I get out and sell my work. But I will say, Chip, I realize I'm in the middle of a transition in my art. So I'm struggling a little bit right now. Because transitions are hard. Most of my art is very detailed and realistic, and I feel very comfortable with that, and I get very satisfied. I'm very satisfied with, painting something and having it look almost photorealistic. But I realized that I want to move away from that. I want to get a little bit away from the details and shift to a little more ephemeral. I know that I'll always be realistic and representational. I don't think I'd ever go fully abstract, although I've done a few abstract pieces, but I really like representational art. But it's a real struggle because I have these ideas and I'm not sure how to do them. And I've only been painting for 7 years, but I'm feeling like I'm kind of at the beginning again, because I know I want to shift to this, a different way of looking at my art and a different way of painting. So, and I'm in the middle of this transition. So I have to say it's hard. It's hard, and I'm struggling a bit. And I really knew I was struggling in the past 3 months. I finish a canvas or I finish a painting and I can't decide what to do next. Even though I have lots of ideas, I look at all my, a lot of my work, not all of it, is from photos. And so I have a whole file of photos of things that I've looked at that I want to paint. And I look at them and nothing speaks to me. And that's another indication that I know I'm in transition. And I also know part of it is yes, I can look at a photo and I can paint it and I can make it look really good, but I want to paint more from what's in my head rather than from a photo, or things I've seen but I couldn't get a good photo of, and that's hard too. So that's what I'll say. Where I am in my work right now is in transition, and it's hard.
Well, it's great that you're willing to share that, because I think one of the things that artists sometimes do, and people in general, when you're having a hard time, a lot of people don't like to admit it, but that's just part of life, and particularly part of a creative life, that, if you're not evolving and changing, then you're getting stagnant.
Yep. I agree.
So thank you for sharing that. So we kick off the questions with, what is your first memory of making art of any kind?
So that it makes me laugh when when I saw this, that you're going to ask this question, because I had to think, when was the first time I remember doing art? And the thing that popped in my head, Chip, you probably remember, you're maybe old enough to remember, but in the back of magazines in the late 60s and early 70s were these ads. And it was like, draw this picture and
Mhm.
win $1,000 scholarship to art school. And I remember, it was like a turtle. And one I think was a dog, and one was a pirate. And I remember drawing those probably in about fifth grade. And I even think I may have sent one in. I don't know. I don't know if I ever did or not. So that's my first memory. The other thing is, I do remember doing paint by numbers.
Mhm.
I think probably, in elementary school, doing paint by numbers was my other memory. And just always being interested. Young, knowing that I wanted to do art. I wanted to go to art school. I never did. We can talk about that maybe later. Well, part of it is, so I took art in middle school, loved it, was my absolute favorite class. Then I got into high school, and I took my first year, took art, and I grew up in South Carolina, not great schools. I was in art class, and I was like the only non-athlete in the class.
Hmm.
And I remember the art teacher asking the class, like the first or second day, what are the primary colors and what are the secondary colors? And I knew those. And he was almost mad that I knew them and was upset. And I knew that it was not the right place. I took art that semester, and then didn't take art again
Hmm.
in high school. I did take a photography class, and I did theater, because I was searching for that creative outlet. But it's always there. It's always there. It was there throughout my life. And I think it was always that I wanted to paint.
So, how did you come to your current medium of acrylic on canvas and acrylic on barnwood, and why?
So acrylic, I love acrylic because it's easy. With water, you don't have to worry about oils. Just can be messy and I don't know, more challenging. And so I'm self-taught. So when I finally got the courage and the situation was right, that I was gonna paint, acrylics were just, I don't know, they seemed the obvious choice. They were inexpensive, easy to work with, and I love them. I really have not had a desire to go to oil or even other watercolor. Watercolor to me seems very daunting. Even
Hmm.
though I've talked to many watercolorists, and they say the reason they like watercolor is because it's so easy to work with, and if you make mistakes, you can fix them. And I just don't see that in watercolor. I see that in acrylic. It's very easy to make, if you make a mistake, you can paint over it. And as you mentioned, my painting, because since I'm self-taught and my background is science, every painting was an experiment. And when I first started painting, I I have one of my early painting, I was painting a blanket on a sofa and painting those folds. I have no training. I don't know how to do it. Don't know how to do dark and light and shade. I must have painted that blanket a dozen times before I
Hmm.
got to where I wanted it to be. And acrylics, at least I saw that it allows me to do that. Now that I've been painting for a while, I might try something else, but I feel very comfortable with acrylics. But 5 years from now, it may be like, okay, I'm too comfortable. Now it's time to try something else so that I can can get more comfortable. And even right now, I talk about my transition right now. I still want to stay in acrylics, but I'm also a long time meditator. And in the meditation field, we talk about like beginner's mind. I'm feeling that way a little bit in painting. I'm in beginner's painting mind, which is an uncomfortable place to be, but not a bad place to be. And I know that if I switch to a different medium, that that may happen. And maybe in the future, I want that, and I might switch to another medium. But I like the brightness of acrylics. And again, everything I know is through experimentation and trying things. And so far, acrylics, really, really work for me. So,
Okay. It's always interesting to see, how the choices are made to come to a particular media for an artist. Sometimes it's clearly a choice. Other times it's the media finds the artist.
yep, I can say that. And I can say, I like you mentioned in my introduction that I feel like creativity, I've always been a creative person. And so I took dance classes. I learned how to play the piano for a couple of years. I did a clay throwing class. I took drawing classes. So I feel like I've searched, and none of those were my creative outlet. I enjoyed them all. I did them for a while, but they were not my creative outlet. When I hit acrylics, it was like, well, they were part of it. I think I made the decision that I am going to do this. So there was this real commitment that I am going to do this. No matter what, I am going to do this. And so I did it. And, when I first started, I was not very good at all. I find it funny when someone comes up to me and says, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, yes, you could. If you saw my first paintings, because they said it would look like stick figures. And I said, if you saw my first painting, they look like stick figures. But there was something about painting and painting in acrylics that just stuck with me, that I was willing to persist through the ugly, through the hard, until I got to where, and in each painting, there's always a stage where the painting is just ugly. You have to enjoy it enough or be committed enough to go through that ugly, hard part. And I can tell you, doing my little wood blocks sometimes help me get through that in a painting. When you're in that ugly, hard part where you're not sure how you're going to get it to look the way you want it to look, sometimes you just have to step back and do something else. And
Yeah.
I liked, I think that the acrylics, I liked it enough. It rung true with me enough to stick with it until I got to where I wanted to be. And I would tell someone, I know you're going to ask this later though about advice. I would tell someone, so like piano, I loved it. I played piano for 2 years, but then, I just kind of got bored with it. It wasn't the right creative outlet for me. And that's fine. When I used to teach college, I would always tell students that it's just as important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is to figure out what you want to do. And I feel like in my life, I've had lots of creative outlets, some that are more considered art, others that are, like teaching. Teaching, that was very much a creative outlet. My science was very much a creative outlet. But in art, I feel like it's okay to find out that piano was not for me, or that clay was not my media. And it's okay to find that out. It's okay to, if you're not persisting in this thing that you're trying, then that's not your right media. Let it go and move on to something else. But then you do it because I think that when you get to that hard part, if that is your media, if that is what you really want to do, you'll keep doing it, even if it's hard. And if you stop doing it because it's hard, then maybe that's not the right media for you. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. To me, there's a balance there. I think you hit it early on in your response of saying, you hit the hard part, but you have to get through that, right? And don't get discouraged when you hit the hard part. Just either step away and come back, or muscle on through it. One of the things people look at my photography, and I've talked to a number of other artists, and people look at their art and go, oh, wow, it's amazing. You have a real gift. I'm like, okay, there is an element of, I'll call it an innate talent, but so much of it really is more about just persistence in doing the work. It really is that. That's, people talk about, a work of art. And I think that's a an appropriate term because it is work. It takes effort. It takes a lot of investment of your time and ability.
And then I would also say that, if you do try something, because I took a painting class, oh gosh, 15 years ago, but it was I knew nothing. I mean, I knew nothing about painting. I went into the class, they set up some books and they said, paint it. I didn't even know what brush to use. I knew nothing. So it was not the right class for me, for sure. But and I can kind of see why an art teacher might start someone painting that way. It just was not the right approach for me. And it may be that you come back to something as well. It might not have hit you
Mhm.
at that point, but because you weren't ready. So it's never say never when it comes to art.
There you go. I like that. So, what inspires your art? Where does it come from?
Mostly nature. My undergrad degree was in biology. My PhD was in molecular biology. And so mostly I did, lab work. But I remember when I first met with my high school counselor, we met with them once back in the day, and they said, what do you want to do? I had no idea what I wanted to do. I said, I want to work outside. And she said, okay, how about forestry? And I said, okay. So I started in undergrad actually in forestry because I think I just have a love of outside,
Yeah.
of nature, of being outside. It's just always been there. So nature does, and then travel. Places I travel, I get inspiration from traveling. I get inspiration from looking at other people's art. I love, I follow lots of artists on Instagram, and I'll get ideas there from things I see. I saw a photograph of a back of a leaf, and I thought, oh, it was a black and white, but I'm like, oh, I want to paint the back of a leaf, a big, and I did. I did a 36 by 24 back of
Mm.
a magnolia leaf where you see the veins and the shadows. But I got the idea actually from a black and white photo a friend of mine who's a photographer on Instagram posted. So there, and like I said, now I'm in transition. So things in my head, I, recently painted, it was before Christmas because it was one of my few paintings that painted really right away, right when I did it. And it was strictly from my head. I thought of, it was in fall, it was last fall, and I kept seeing, driving around, I would see the leaves flying off the trees. It was a very windy day. And I was like, oh, I want to paint something like that. And it was very simple. It was literally a tree on, just with a horizon and red and yellow leaves falling off of it. And I called it Letting Go. And it was all in my head. I mean, I got inspired by
Mhm.
seeing the leaves falling off the trees, blowing off the trees. So I think being out in nature, and we moved to Pittsburgh 5.5 years ago, and we live on 5 acres. Never in a million years thought I would ever live rural. Always was a city girl, and
Mm.
I absolutely love it. And there's just so much here. We have a pond, we have birds, we have. It's about half of it is open, and half of it is wooded. And I love it. I love it here. Love the nature. Love the wildlife, the flora, everything. So those are the kind of things that inspire me.
Yeah. Sounds like you've moved to a very inspirational location.
Yes.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what advice would you give to an artist just starting out? And I think because you started a later career artist or encore career, as I like to call it, maybe something specific to that.
My suggestion would be, it's kind of simple, but just do it. Whatever it is, what just do it and follow your curiosity. And that actually doesn't come from me. It comes from Elizabeth Gilbert. She talks about, and this really struck a chord, and I use this with my students as well. She said, people would always ask, what is your passion? What is your passion? And it's like, if I knew what my passion was, I'd be doing it. And she kind of turned that around and said, follow your curiosity. What are you curious about? What do you want to just kind of explore? And that's really kind of how I started. I was like, I've always wanted to paint. Let me just try it. Let me see how it goes. so it really is follow your curiosity. It doesn't mean that it's what you're going to do the rest of your life. I mean, I think I've done that all my life, when I took piano, when I took a pottery class, when I took dance, whatever, follow what you're curious about. And if it clicks, it clicks. And when it clicks, also remember that it is going to get hard. But anything you want to really accomplish is going to be hard, but it's hard in a fun and rewarding way. And I think for me, I had no idea where it was going to go. I just knew I wanted to paint. It wasn't that I would ever sell a painting or that I would ever even, give someone a painting. I just wanted to paint. And if it looked good, maybe I might put it on my walls. I don't know. I just wanted to paint. And it's interesting that for me, what I found very interesting was the transition to being able to sell my paintings. Because I think once I started painting, and I think this might be true for a lot of new artists, they're like your babies. And especially with painting, you put so many, when you first start, I mean, you put so many hours and so much time in this thing that you've created. I mean, how could I ever let it go? I might be able to put it on my wall, but I'll tell you, my very first canvas, because I started just painting on canvas sheets, cheap, because I knew I wasn't going to be any good. So I started on that. But my very first canvas was very intimidating. I will say that, when I actually bought a real canvas, stretched and framed. My very first canvas, about a year later, it was just kind of leaning in my studio. We had moved here, and I have a studio here, which is great. I love it. And my sister-in-law was there for Christmas, and she pointed to me. She said, "Can I have that?" And I was like, "Sure." And I realized, okay, I'm at a point in my painting where I'm ready to let them go. And then that year, I painted paintings for my sister, for my two children, and my sister-in-law. So then it started giving them away. And then I sold one. I set up a website right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I would say definitely once you get to a point where you feel comfortable letting go of your art, you got have a website. And, I sold my first painting, which was a huge thing. And now it's like, yes, I want to sell my paintings. I can let them go pretty fast, but I can tell you, I still need to sit with them when I finish one. Even if I post on social media and it sells right away, which doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. I need to sit with it for about at least 3 or 4 days before I'm ready to let it go, because it still feels a part of me. So that was a long-winded answer to a lot of things, but basically, be curious, and you'll find your outlet. Be willing to go through the hard part.
Good advice. Definitely good advice. So, what artist should we go check out? Could be somebody you've just recently discovered, an old master, somebody you go back to time and time again?
Well, I'll give you a couple of both. So my favorite artists, and the ones I go back to over and over again, are Georgia O'Keeffe and Van Gogh. And I think, for Georgia O'Keeffe, I've always loved her work. And I think it's the colors. I love her color and her use of color and shape. Color and shape is what I see that in my work as well, is that I like color and shape. My favorite pieces, I do landscapes, I do all kinds of things, but my favorite pieces are the more close up, where I am focusing on shape and color. But Van Gogh, I guess I go back to the color. I just love the colors. And Van Gogh, the movement. I mean, his work just looks like it's moving. And so those are my two of the older of my two favorite. And I go back. I have books of both O'Keeffe, and probably go back to her more than Van Gogh. But those are my two favorite. There are two artists that are in the Chatham Artists Guild, which is the guild that I am in, that I really like. And there's one who is a painter, Sarah Graham. And I think she has influenced me in this transition I'm in, because she paints very kind of ethereal. She does have shape, but it's very ethereal and kind of mystical. And so I really like her work, Sarah Graham. It's
Hmm.
beautiful. And usually a lot of greens. If you look at my work, there's a lot of greens in my work. And so I really like hers. And then another one who's not a painter that's in the guild, a young artist that we haven't, well, young compared to me, Andrew Wilson works in wood, and he does some of the neatest thing. He does these beautiful burnt wood, and he does mobiles. But what I really like is on wood, he uses electricity through the
Hmm.
wood, and
Hmm.
he makes shapes, and then he'll paint or do things around the shape that the electricity goes through the wood. So I really like his work just because it's, to me, it's very unique what he does with. I love wood. I think that's kind of why I started painting on the barn wood, is that I mean, I look at my house and I have wood. There's a lot of wood in my house. So those are two masters and two kind of newer people that I've met through the Chatham Artist Guild here in Chatham County.
Well, cool. I look forward to checking both of the Chatham County folks out. Neither name is one I've run across. Well, we also want to make sure that folks can check your work out. So I've got your website as theartistbb2.com and your Boots Quimby on both Instagram and Facebook. Is there anybody else in the physical world or the virtual world where people can go check your work out?
So I currently have 3 pieces in the Smelt Gallery. If you're probably not familiar with it because it's new. It's here in Pittsburgh, but we have it's called the Beverage District or the Plant. It's a really cool place if you ever want to come over and check it out, because they have a brewery, they have a distillery, Fair Game Distillery, if you've ever heard of them, and they have Starlight Mead, and then they have a few restaurants, and it's just an open space where you can get a beverage from any of those and get some lunch and sit. They have a giant chessboard. They have a great place to take kids because they have like a swing set and lots of place to run around, lots of open space. And there's a gallery there, Smelt Gallery. And I am currently, the exhibit there is landscapes, real or imagined. And I have 3 of my landscapes in Smelt Gallery. And I just recommend it because it's just a fun, kind of funky place to go. All ages. If you have kids, there's things for kids to do. If you're older, it's just kind of a fun place to hang out. So,
Well, cool. I'll have to get over there. I've checked out Pittsburgh in the past and have enjoyed that, but I'm not familiar with the beverage district. So that'll be a little getaway trip for me.
yes.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end. I once again thank you for sharing a bit of your creative journey with our audience. And I want to thank our audience for their continued interest and support of the channel. So please tune in next time for the next episode of the Artist Spotlight. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Artist Spotlight with Chip Freund. Find accompanying blog posts at chipfreundphoto.com/blog, and you may subscribe to our show on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like listening.